Hey there, welcome back. This is Shireen with another Adobe tutorial. But as you can see today, we're shifting gears and I've got InDesign open. So InDesign is our container into which we place our images that we created, our artwork that we created from both Photoshop and Illustrator, and we bring all that glorious content into InDesign so we can create some beautiful layouts for either digital or printed publication. So let's get started. We're going to do a create new. We're going to take a look at that new document, those options there really for us. And in my case, just to do a super quick start, I'm going to go ahead and choose tabloid. Maybe I'll do something different than I usually do. I'm going to choose vertical orientation. I always like to go ahead and set up inches rather than picas. Columns, pages, start number. Well, for pages, let me give myself 5 pages just to start. It's very easy to add pages after. And then for columns, columns just means sort of, again, how are you going to kind of divide up your page, particularly if you're working with a lot of type, for example, or you already sort of know a set grid ratio that you want to work with. The gutter has to do with sort of the space between those columns. So if you're imagining a page that you're going to be folding, like as a pamphlet, the gutter would just allow for that little bit of a buffer because we're going to lose some content there. So I'm going to go ahead and start with just 5 pages. This is really the only choice we need to consider. Again, sorry, there's all these glorious templates down here, so I certainly invite you to explore those as well. But here, just for a standard, starting from 0, I'm going to choose that tabloid. So facing pages is my only choice. So what does facing pages mean? If I know already, for example, for a printed publication that I want a cover page, I would go ahead and say a cover page with a spread, 2-page spreads. I'm going to choose facing pages. I'm going to keep that checked. If I don't need a cover page, if I don't need spreads, but rather I just need simply slides, and that would be for a digital publication, then I'm not going to check facing pages. Whatever you do, either way, it's really easy to edit it or make the adjustment after you get started. So I'm going to leave facing pages so that I have a cover page and spreads. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. You can see that in the panels, for this quick series of getting started videos, the panels, really the main panels I'm going to be talking about are pages, which is open, and you can see that that's already giving us a preview of where we are so that we're navigating our document. Links just has to do with sort of what's being brought in, what's the artwork that we're placing into our container, into InDesign. So this, and then, layers should feel familiar if we were already working with Photoshop and Illustrator. So in my pages, let's say I want to get started sort of with page 1. When I double click, it takes me to that page. If I want to zoom out further, Command minus or Command plus to zoom in. Right? And then now I can see my whole presentation. As far as my tools, not that many new tools. A lot of these should look really familiar. And they've got move tools. We've got a page tool that should look familiar from Artboard. Gap is kind of new because that talks about the spacing. We can, we'll talk about that, but it's, something, again, not that much of a learning curve. Content collector, when we're sort of recycling and using a lot of that same content over and over again, it's a nice place to kind of store content for reuse. Type and line and pen, all the stuff we know, our vectors, our cutting, our rotating, our gradients, etc., eyedropper. So all of these are familiar to us. It's just the rectangle tool though. Let's talk about that for a second. That rectangle tool just has to do with the way that InDesign functions. In the same way that in Illustrator, for example, whether you're actively choosing to use a color or the answer is none, you're still making a decision about what is going to be the fill and the stroke. And in InDesign, much the same way, whether you're actively creating a frame or not, InDesign, when you place work in, you're always placing content into frame. Content into frame. And so there's always a frame whether you create it or not. Okay, so let's talk about how that looks. Let's say for this first page, for example, I'm going to do a little mini presentation, editorial, fashion editorial about modest fashion, Islamic fashion, hijabi fashion. So I've got some photos that I found from Pexels, free stock photos. Check my comments. I've cited the photographers there. So I got some great images and I'm ready to get started. So let's find something for our cover page. We're going to go to File, Place. Let's say this glorious lady here is going to go right on the front. And if I kind of just go ahead and click, It's a really, really, really big image and it's not fitting at all. If we click, we see that this blue indicates the frame, and when we double click, this also indicates the contents inside. And you can see that I'm inside when I can move it around. So you can see that that's moving around. I'm moving the contents, not the frame. So that's visually how that looks. So that's if I just, so InDesign created that frame. I did nothing. What about option B? What about if I'm a little bit more involved in the process and I do File, Place, find that image again, but this time I'm going to create, let's create at least a box that's generally, I'm trying to, I don't know if you can see, I'm trying to force it to kind of be the same page size as my cover page, but it's actually just not letting me because it's not, it's out, it would be out of proportion. So that's about as close as I can get. I've now created a frame, double click, that's the contents inside the frame. But since my margin is here, what I can actually do is just say, leave the image as it is and just make the frame a little bit smaller. There. So when we zoom out, she's now, oops, grab her from down here too so she doesn't go off the margin. That's it. Her image now fits on the front page. When I double click, the image is still that size. It's still as big as it wants to be. I can actually make her a little bit bigger if I wanted to resize her, right? And so that's that cover page. If I want for right now, I think I'm just going to kind of take down the opacity. I'll imagine that I'm going to lay out some type on top, and that's sort of my first page. Now what happens when I have multiple images? So here's where I might want to use a grid, for example. So here's again what happens, File, Place, with me, with InDesign not having any frames ready. I can do Command, click, Command, click, Command, click to add for images that are not in sequence. So let's say I want to kind of just start trying to make sort of my own grid on the fly. I'm trying to use smart guides, but there might be some room for error there. So no matter what, I did File, Place, I brought in multiple images. I tried to create that frame on the fly, but as you see, they're not exactly the same size. And when I'm trying to work quickly, it's not really easy to make sure that they're all lined up and everything. So if you notice here that little link icon that shows that InDesign has created the frame since there was none already ready to work with. Okay, so not, to me, the optimal idea. What I want to do instead is I would love to create this gorgeous grid of frames that's already ready to go. I'm going to get that frame tool. And again, I'll try to kind of get some frames ready. I think this is looking a little bit better. Maybe it's not, maybe it is. But in this way, if I have some frames ready, I'll be able to place the images right into my frames. I still think that there's some human error though. It's not exactly quite right. So now, last but not least, I'm going to show you what I think is really the most efficient way. I'm going to go ahead and grab some frames, and I'm going to do something called GRIDIFY, where I make multiple frames all at the same time, and they're all uniform, perfectly sized, and ready for my content. So that looks like this. Taking that frame tool, as I start to sort of estimate how much of my page I want to dedicate to these photos, I'm going to go ahead and with the frame, my hand is still currently active on the mouse. I haven't released it. I'm going to use my right arrow, and my up arrow to splice the frame into 4. Once again, right arrow, up arrow. If I want to reduce the number of subframes that I've made, down arrow, left arrow. Okay, and in this way already I have 4 perfectly uniform frames. So now, last but not least, let's try it again. There we go. And we're ready to bring them in. Now, if I bring them in without any thought about, remember what happened with that first image when we just brought, remember when we just brought her in, it was a huge image and it didn't fit at all on the on that first page. So if I bring them in without considering how they fit, it's probably going to take me even longer to resize them all. So I want to call your attention up here to the icons in the control panel that talk about the fit, and that's whenever you see the word auto fit, that reminds you it's these guys right here, these icons right here. So I can go ahead and kind of say fill the frames proportionally, just fill my frames, and I can go ahead and do auto fit. so that when it's coming in, I can just come in now. Perfect. All right. So if I want to do that the long way, I can also, I just undid that, undo, undo, Command Z, Command Z. I can also go to Object, Fitting, Frame, Fitting Options, and that's my default. It's normally set to none. I like to fit the frame, fill the frame proportionally, so that the frame is what's most important, because that's what's taking up the how I'm laying out my page. And then here's where I say auto fit, handle all the content the same. So I can come here now, and once again, click, click, clicking within my frame. I've got these images, they're perfectly sized. And if I double click, you see, it didn't distort the image. Here's what would happen, for example, if I said go ahead and just fit the content right into that frame. Look at her proportion now, and look how it distorted her. Okay, so this is my preferred setting. Sometimes, depending on the contents, I decide to do fit the content proportionally, right? And then in that way, though, it disregards the frame. So in this case, that's not going to work for me. So you can kind of play around with that right setting and then hitting auto fit to ensure that that will remain the same. So now I've got my gorgeous grid here. Maybe I also want to bring in, let's say, one other image for my lady on the side here, my other side of my spread. Let's say I'm going to design the page where she takes up half of that page. Let's find the image I was thinking of. Yep, that would be her. So went ahead and just dropped the image right into the frame. Here's where I can come in and say fill the frame proportionally. Okay, and that way when we double click, we see once again the fitting is that here's the actual image, but it's filling the frame proportionally. If, for example, here's a good image for you to see, you know, really the differences. They look really different. Fit the content proportionally will fit that entire content into that frame. It'll look like this. That's not the result I want. What about fit the entire content to the frame, distort it to get the whole thing to fit into the frame? No, right? So here's where I need to make these choices. And again, auto fit can get you that, can just go ahead and make that more uniform. So since I'm working into the content by double clicking, I can kind of have her moved over a little bit more. There, I sort of like that positioning. When I'm working, I actually don't like to see all these frames, in fact, so I like to go to View, Overprint Preview. How's the print preview? And it's not going to print with all those frames and all that. That's just for me. Great, that's going to be how it looks. So I'm going to continue now. I want to bring in some type, and I'm not going to be able to complete this whole layout, but I want to just show you how I'm going to just start to import images, how I'm going to start to bring in some very basic type. So as far as my type goes, let's say, for example, on this page, let's say I want to do 2 columns of type. I don't know what the type is going to be yet. It's still being written. So let's just say that all I know, though, is that I do want 2 columns. So the type tool, I'm doing the same thing. I'm dragging out a type box, and I'm going to use my right arrow to splice it into 2. So that's a really nice trick, a really nice easy way. And you see now it's really lined up. I'm going to go ahead and do type fill with placeholder text. Unfortunately, not like Illustrator. Illustrator just the default goes ahead and jumps in and fills it with some placeholder text. Here we have to do it manually. Type fill with the placeholder. So then, now that we're looking at it, this is how it's going to start to look. It's starting to look kind of nice, right? What if I want a title up here on this page? So I'm going to come in again with my type box. Let's say I want to kind of get it lined up to the rest of the boxes, and I'm going to go ahead and do modest fashion in focus. All right, and this is really, really small. I'm going to select it up in my control panel. Just like with Photoshop and Illustrator, everything I'm doing, there's always the related functions always appearing. It's dynamic, that control panel. If I'm working with type, I'll get my options for type, right? So if I look up here, I can kind of try to guess. Is it going to be 60? No, that's too big. Is it going to be 48? Maybe, but I think I wanted it bigger. I don't know. Why don't I try to do this instead visually? aha, right? So instead of guessing here numerically, I can also just come in here. Let's say I'm back over here. I can come in and use Shift+Command and the period, Shift+Command period, right? Or Shift+Command and comma to bring it in, all right? So it's actually, I think it's 51, not 48. And so I wouldn't have been able to figure that out by playing around and guessing, and it would just take too much time, and it doesn't make any sense when I can just go ahead and do that, and it looks great, right? So I can come back in my next video and we'll talk about sort of shifting different, choosing different fonts. Last but not least, before I'm ready to save, it's starting to look pretty good. When I'm ready to start saving, I could, also too, I can grab my little line tool, right? Make the stroke, right, to the way that I like. So this is starting to look pretty good. All I want to do now, though, before I start to show you how we're going to wrap up and prepare to save, is we're going to just go ahead and select our images. And I just want to show you that the frames don't need to remain these very standard rectangles, right? Next to that fitting neighborhood, I could come over here, and instead of that basic default rectangle, I could choose, for example, bevel, right? And that looks kind of nice. I actually really like bevel in this case, but I could also choose, there's all kinds of other options, right? And then, one of the most common ones, rounded, right? So I can make these choices according to sort of what I think looks best. Let's go back to bevel in this case. If I also want, I can keep moving along my control panel from fitting to the frame. The frame can be adjusted too, right? A little bit too much. Okay, and then I can come over to the next section. That next section, as you saw earlier, that's where I had adjusted the opacity, right? But most importantly, there's also all these really great effects. Oops, right? There's all these great effects. Having trouble getting this back up to 100. So there's all these great effects which are under the effects panel. Okay, so I can also do some feathering, right? So I'm going to go ahead actually and just cancel that out. I don't think that that's the right effect for me for today. But there's plenty more where that came from. You've got feather, you've got a bevel and emboss. This is really good for if you're sort of wanting to create sort of that button effect. So it gives it some depth, right? It starts to look like buttons there with those shadows. Okay, so again, thanks but no thanks. If anything, the only thing I might want would be drop shadow, but lo and behold, there's actually an icon right just for drop shadow without even having to go into effects. I can just grab it from there, see if a drop shadow would be the right thing for me in this case. Yeah, I don't mind that. I don't mind it at all. Okay, so for right now, let's say I'm going to go ahead and actually let's imagine that I want to give this a little bit of space. So I'm going to actually bring these both down. Sorry. I'm going to bring them both down just to give them a little bit more space. Okay, so now I'm ready to save, but am I? Before I save anything, before I move on, oh, you know what? I have one more thing I have to do. Sorry. Let's say that this image is not the right image. Let's say it was supposed to be another image. I messed up. It's not the right image. What should I do? I'm going to go to my links panel, and I'm going to find that the links panel is managing everything for me, keeping track of every image I'm using. And so if this is the one in question, right, it takes me right to it. It shows me that this is the one in question. I can come to the side of my panel and say relink, and I'll bring it back, and I'll find this other image instead, and it'll go ahead and relink. Okay, in this case I think I actually like the other one, but that's how I would relink. So I'm going to do an undo and keep the original trio there. I kind of thought they were nice. So I can relink from my links panel to the side, relink. Okay, also if I want, I can also do that from here, relink from the bottom of the panel as well. Okay, it gives you the PPI, the DPI, it gives you the size, the dimensions, it gives you all the information you need. If this file started to get really big, for example, let me just show you that the dimensions for this one photo are 6,000 by 4. It's a super high res image. Just letting you know that something that you could do to bring your image size down would be to go ahead and run them through Photoshop, where you would do a reduction of the image size, and that could be something that you use the automate function, a batch function, and that's something that I can do another demo for if you needed to reduce your sizes of your images. Okay, so the links panel is super helpful, but now we're back at the pages panel, and let's say all I want to do, actually I think this one I just want to set it to be bold, so let me go ahead and do. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing again. Shift+Command, period. Okay, so I just want it to be a little bit heavier. All right, so now we've got these images ready to go, and I'm ready to save. Before I do anything, I need to come down here, and right at the bottom, I'm going to notice that there's a red stop sign. It says, no, don't go any further. You have an error. I need to double click on that, and it brings me up to something called the Preflight panel, and Preflight panel is going to be it's keeping track of everything I'm doing. It's telling me that the error has to do with something wrong with the text. When I open up that arrow, it's telling me that there's overset text. The text is too much for the box. And when I open that up, it says it's actually happening right there on page 2, and it brings you right to page 2. And sure enough, you see that little red box. It's showing that there is overset text. Okay, so in this case, what I think I'll do just for this quick demo is, let's say I get rid of some of that type. So now there's no more overset text, and we look down here and it says no errors. How did I get to that Preflight? I double clicked right there, Preflight. Okay, so I'm here, I'm ready to save now. I've got green light means go, and instead of just doing a file, I'm actually going to copy this here as well. Okay, so now instead of just doing file save as normally we would, I want to invite you to consider something even better than that. I want you to come into file package. And what package is going to do is it's going to assume that you're bringing these images to be shared either digitally or also to be sent to a printer. And so what it wants to do is it wants to package up all the fonts, all the links, information about color. It's pretty great. So when I do that, it's going to say, do you want to save this first? I'm going to say sure. Okay. Modest fashion in focus. And I'm going to say save it to my hijabi demo. And now it's going to ask me, do I have any instructions for the printer? I don't know who I'm going to use yet, so I'm not going to do anything about that yet. But here's where it's saying I'm going to make a folder, and I'm going to include the fonts and your graphics and your graphic links. I'm going to also include an IDML. IDML means it's a legacy version of InDesign in case you're sending it to a printer who has a lower version, a previous version. So that's awesome. So instead of getting just the IDD file, they're getting an IDML. But most importantly, to be honest, for easy sharing, the PDF, of course, right? So it's also including a PDF for you, which is great. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, save. Here it's telling you, be careful, don't steal software, don't steal fonts. So we want to make sure, of course, that that's best practices. Of course, we would never do such a thing. And when we wait for 2 seconds for it to do its magic, I'm going to take you over to see what that folder looks like. Okay. All right. So we go to File Open, and inside this folder is this amazing folder it just created, Muslim Fashion in Focus, and inside it's got all the fonts that I used, Minion and Impact and Adobe, and it's got all the links. Here's all the images that are included in this file. Here's the legacy file and the original InDesign file, and here's a PDF of that file, universally open. Any instructions would be also included, and that's pretty great. Okay, so that is all the things you need to do to just get basically started and up and running in InDesign. A little bit of a longer video today, but this is, again, hopefully something that you can just feel comfortable to just start bringing and importing images in. check out our next video, check out my next video. I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of managing your font, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of how to manage maybe some of the graphics or images so that you can have more consistency in your presentation. All right, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Ask any questions below. Thanks for watching.